What is the future of Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane? When is the most likely time we'll see the two Blackhawks depart the organization via trade? Plus, we have some signings to discuss, some PTOs heading into training camp, and the Vegas Golden Knights receive bad news that goalie Robin Lehner is expected to miss the entire upcoming season. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade talk around the Blackhawks here to talk about today. First up, we do have a few signings and some PTOs to take a look at. The Buffalo Sabres have signed veteran center iceman Riley Sheahan, who's been basically playing on a lot of short-term deals. This time it gets a 1 year, but it is a two-way, but it is a higher payout should he play in the AHL. But I think he'll have a decent shot at making the Sabres roster at a training camp. We'll have to see how that goes, but he gets $950 at the NHL level and $375 for the American Hockey League. So obviously that's a pretty lucrative deal for that aspect of it, at least. Except he's been playing fourth line center role for a variety of teams, kind of bouncing around here the last few years. So we'll see what he can do with the Buffalo Sabres. The Chicago Blackhawks have come to terms with one of their first round picks from the 2022 NHL draft, and that's defenseman Kevin Korchinski, who was selected with the pick they got in the Alex DeBrincat trade, the former pick from the Ottawa Senators, who was obviously the prime asset in that deal. They did get a couple other picks as well, but that high first rounder was by far the biggest part of that trade. So Korchinski, who is very much expected to remain in junior for the upcoming season, will get his 3-year ELC and likely go back to playing D in the Western Hockey League for the fall time and for the upcoming NHL and junior season. We also got word that the Detroit Red Wings come to terms with defenseman Jake Wallman. He gets a 1-year contract. The RFA will still be RFA again next year. The 1-year deal is valued at just over $1 million, $1.05 million, and they avoid salary arbitration. And that means that all of the eligible cases have now been settled. We only actually had the one deal go through the full entire process. So as we talked about at the beginning of that one, the RFA arbitration dates were first coming around and the filings were first taking place. I know for some fans it might be a little skeptical or nervous about how things are going to go, but most deals do get settled on their own outside of that. Now there is still a bunch of RFAs that are not signed, that are not arbitration eligible. There's still some of those players which we will still see some signings here over the course of the next few weeks leading into training camp. And of course we're bound to see a little bit more focus too on teams doing contract extensions for players entering the final year of their contract, for example. That's still another group that you're going to see NHL GMs kind of turn their focus to here now that a lot of the other business and regular free agency and RFAs are mostly done with, like I said, still a handful of players that are not ARB eligible needing new contracts. Now, when it comes to some PTOs, a few players have been given those already. There's bound to be a bunch more of these as well. We do know that which one of the prime players, or more noteworthy players, I guess you could say, the Florida Panthers, of course, who had acquired Mark Stahl earlier as a free agent. His brother Eric is going to be coming back to make another NHL attempt as well. He will be going to camp with them on a PTO. That was announced a while ago. We have never talked about it here on the channel, but first time we're really getting into PTOs. The Maple Leafs have signed defenseman Dylan Ferguson to a PTO as well. Of course, he was a player that was originally drafted by the Dallas Stars and was involved in a trade going to Vegas right after the expansion draft on a Mark Mathot deal. Of course, Vegas kind of claimed Mathot and then later traded him to the Stars, and then picking up the young goaltender. He's been in their system. He was kind of forced into playing NHL duty really, really early on in Vegas' first season. They ran into a ton of goalie injuries. They went through like 5 or 6 goaltenders. Not something that's very common, that you don't see very much, but still certainly he was kind of thrust into action really early on. But of course, at this point, he's become an RFA, was not qualified, and is now an unrestricted free agent. So he's looking for a more permanent contract if he can get one. So he'll try out with the Leafs. If he does get a deal, definitely going to be a 2-way contract if they're able to sign him. The Nashville Predators have signed Cole Schneider to a PTO as well. The Florida Panthers are bringing in Andrew Hammond for some extra goaltending insurance, you could say. Obviously, again, somebody who I would think would likely be at best on a two-way deal. Obviously, they have Bobrovsky and Spencer Knight, but he could be that veteran insurance piece should they run into injury issues later on in the year. That's the main way he's been able to see NHL action here, bits and pieces over the past couple of seasons, but he's still obviously looking to continue his NHL career, even if it means spending a big chunk of the time in the AHL. So he could be one of those more lucrative AHL contracts if he does get one from them, like we had talked about before with Riley Sheahan. So we'll see how things work out for the Hamburglar. And the Calgary Flames have brought in Josh Brook, former Habs prospect. He gets a PTO as well with Calgary after not being qualified as an RFA with the Montreal Canadiens organization. So like I said, there's bound to be a ton more of those PTOs as we head into training camps coming up here more closer to September, but we'll hear about this likely throughout the rest of the month. And of course, the big injury news today comes from the Vegas Golden Knights, reporting that goaltender Robin Lehner, of course, we knew going into the offseason that he had multiple injuries he was dealing with and had potential to be out for an extended period of time. That part's not a shock or a surprise at all. We knew Lehner was likely going to miss at least the first 3 to 4 months of the year because he did have a shoulder issue he was dealing with and a hip issue, but they're saying now that the hip issue is likely going to cause him to miss the entire 22-23 NHL season. So that certainly causes a variety of issues for them, but also at the same time creates a bit of flexibility. Of course, Robin Lehner by far their starting goaltender, so beyond him, with the other moves they've made, suddenly it's a major drop off in goaltending. So that creates a big hole on the team. It does create a much bigger LTIR pool, of course. They already have the contract of Shea Weber that they traded for from the Montreal Canadiens earlier this offseason. So, of course, with Lehner not being expected to play all year, they can, of course, use that for full LTIR effect and not have to worry about, of course, him coming back and being activated during the regular season. So they could be, over the cap by that amount for the entire year. Of course, last year they spent a large chunk of the season in LTIR. They were deep into it, acquired Jack Eichel. Of course, he went on LTIR himself. Got activated later. They had a variety of guys. Pacioretty was out for a while. Stone was out for an extended time. They had a lot of top players, which is a big part of why they didn't end up making the playoffs for sure. It wasn't very often that Peter DeBoer had a full regular lineup to put on the ice. But this is a major blow. And I do wonder here if the Vegas Golden Knights have some major regrets over how they've handled their roster over the past year or year plus. Really, if you think about it, it wasn't that long ago that they just gave away Dylan Coughlin and Max Pacioretty. Of course, now, Pacioretty himself is injured and going to be out 6 months, which was another twist on the Carolina side that we didn't know about at the time. We haven't really had a lot of details on that, so I assume that it must be an injury that occurred while he was training. There was some pictures and video of him in Carolina gear on the ice training, so I don't believe there's any reason to think he had an injury prior to the deal going down. I haven't heard anything of that nature, but still, they gave away players when they're now their LTIR pool. They could have went about things differently because of the Lehner situation, especially when Pacioretty only had 1 year left on his deal. Even if they didn't get him back until closer to the playoffs, that's still a big situation for them. But now that they definitely need to spend money on goaltending for sure. Obviously, how are they going to go about things now? Of course, Laurent Brossoit has been dealing with injury. I'm not really sure the status of his health. And then, of course, they have Logan Thompson as well. Of course, he didn't do too bad last year, but at the same time, do they feel he's ready to be a starting NHL goaltender? Probably not. I think he's capable of being a regular backup with the potential to play more games due to injuries or whatnot. He could get there. He seems to have good potential. It's just highly questionable and risky to have such an inexperienced goalie be that main guy. He might have no choice but to be. I'm not sure how they're going to go about this. Obviously, we're really late into the offseason, so there's not really much of anything out there in way of free agency that they can look to. They could swing a deal, of course, and maybe trade for a goalie. There's definitely goaltenders on the trade market that I think could be had for the right price. There were several that were mentioned in the rumor mill. The teams were willing to talk about moving heading into the draft and the beginning of free agency that never obviously materialized. So there's still some guys out there. Be really curious to see how this goes about. I mean, obviously they gave away Marc-Andre Fleury not long ago. They gave away Max Pacioretty. They kept Lehner. It's just big time backfiring in Vegas' face here and how they've handle their cap, which in my opinion, like I hate to say anything bad about them, but they have not managed their roster and their cap situation very effectively at all. Like they've overspent way too early, and now they find themselves in quite the predicament. So we'll have to see where things go. But this is certainly going to create a new situation where we could see a Vegas trade involving a goalie to bring in some more experience. Who that is, we don't know yet. I'm sure over the next little while they'll likely be maybe linked to some other players that they're rumored to be talking about or looking at. And then, of course, you have the spin-off effect as well, and how else they're going to go about this. Like, their overall cap situation is not great. They still have to sign Nick Hague as well. If they can get a goalie that's reasonably, not too expensive, because, even with the way their cap situation is with the Weber LTIR, signing Hague was going to likely cause at least one more roster move, but being able to extend their LTIR pool by Lehner's salary as well for another $5 million will certainly give them more flexibility again. So they might be able to sign Hague and bring in a goalie, but of course they might have to give up something to get a goalie. I don't know. It depends on who it is. So we'll see where it goes, but it's certainly going to be a spin-off effect here for sure for the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, in the trade talk for today, there was another Athletic article from Scott Powers kind of updating and analyzing the future of Hawks legends Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews and what their future holds. Lots of talk and rumors about, is this going to be their last year? Will they be traded before the deadline? There was some talk they could even be traded around the time of the draft or early part of free agency. But of course, at this point, Powers is reporting that sources indicate that they have not officially asked the Blackhawks to be dealt. And the same goes the other way, that the Hawks have not officially asked them to waive their no-move clause to be dealt. Now, of course, I don't expect the Chicago side to approach them about waiving until they have a deal that they'd be willing to accept for starters. And if teams are not that serious yet, then that's not surprising to find out. Of course, it's also not overly shocking to find out that they have not officially requested trades. I don't know that they're really going to, per se. I think they're very loyal to that organization. I think they're, based on the article, it sounds like they're very willing to kind of see how the season goes. If Chicago has any chance of being near the playoffs, I think they'll probably stick around and finish out their deal. I don't expect that to happen, though, because Chicago at this point looks like they're really gunning to be near the bottom of the league. They really want to be heavily involved in the Connor Bedard sweepstakes by the looks of things, and I don't see that happening. If they end up out of the playoffs early, then I would suspect that the trade talk and the rumors are likely going to heat up substantially, and then you'll see more teams inquiring and start seeing more potential trades that we could come to be. But at this point, the most likely scenario for Toews and Kane is, unless something changes, and it could always change with one phone call, one conversation, but it looks like the most likely scenario is that they start the season in Chicago. If things go the way it's expected, Chicago is going to be nowhere near the playoffs, and they'll probably be having conversations with Kyle Davidson probably within the first few months. I would suspect that, here's kind of what we are thinking. Here's where we might be willing to go, because they're going to be able to call their own shot here. They're going to be able to decide themselves, do they stay, do they not? And if they do want to go, maybe give one or two teams so that they have the leverage to get what they want here on where they're going to end up. I don't necessarily see the Hawks getting huge returns, because the players are going to have all the leverage, which is going to essentially pass the leverage on to whatever teams are going to be acquiring them. They're definitely going to have to retain 50% of the salary, and there might even be a third team involved as well to kind of broker the deal and retain a little bit of extra money. If teams can get Toews or Kane around that, $3 to $4 million mark, that's pretty good, right? Especially at the deadline after accruing cap, space all season. For those who can stay out of LTIR, especially, it's going to be a lot easier to do. So I would suspect there'll be lots of interest, especially in Kane, by far the bigger name and stronger performer at this point in their careers. But if Jonathan Toews, very well might be playing for an opportunity to attract interest from other clubs. He sounded in his last recent interview with Mark Lazarus very motivated and very hungry to come back into having a strong, productive season. He's finally getting himself back to normal after missing an entire year. Of course, not the past year, but the year before. And, obviously, long layoff, lots to prove. Both want to continue playing, so there's lots to be decided upon. But for right now, it looks like they'll start the year in Chicago and they'll likely be some of the bigger names around the deadline. So let me know your thoughts on the Blackhawks, the signings, everything else discussed here today, especially the Vegas situation as well. Very interesting to see how they handle us and who's going to be starting goaltender for the Golden Knights when we get to opening night here in the not too distant future. So let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.